Good morning everybody and welcome to Wednesday's literacy lesson. So this week you have drawn and labelled a creature ready to put them, or you might have done more than one, put those creatures into your own story later on in the week, and you have written a paragraph describing your animal and how they move. Today we are going to focus on what your creature might be saying to the main character in the story. So we're going to start with a warm-up all about punctuating speech. Now this should be a reminder for most of you. We've done it in class. So we're just going to go through and remind ourselves how we punctuate speech. Okay, so when we want to talk about how somebody is speaking, we use inverted commas. Now you might have heard them called inverted commas or speech marks or even 66s and 99s. So it's these punctuation marks here, okay? And they go at the start when somebody starts speaking, and you have another one at the end when the person has finished speaking or the character has finished speaking, okay? You might use one or you might use two, but you've got to be consistent. You can't have one inverted comma at the start and two at the end. If you're using one, it's got to be one at the beginning and one at the end. If you're using two, it can be two at the beginning or two at the end, okay? So your punctuation has got to be inside your speech marks, inside your inverted commas. So if we have a look at this example, "That looks delicious," said the smallest billy goat gruff. That looks delicious is what the billy goat gruff is saying. So we've got a speech mark at the beginning to show us that's when he starts talking. We've got the other speech mark at the end to show us that's when he finishes speaking. And we've got our punctuation before the final speech mark. So there's our comma. "That looks delicious," said the smallest billy goat gruff. Here it is again. "Hey, goat," shouted the troll. So this is what the troll is saying. So we've got our inverted commas there, one at the start and one at the end. And our punctuation mark this time is not a comma, it's an exclamation mark. But again, it comes before the final inverted comma. "Hey, goat," shouted the troll. And then the troll starts speaking again. So we need a brand new inverted comma to show that he's got something else to say. "You are not allowed to cross my bridge." And there we go. There's the final piece of punctuation. It's a full stop. And again, it goes before the inverted comma. "How can we get to the other side?" asked the biggest goat gruff. This time we've got our inverted comma to open the speech and our inverted comma to show when the goat finishes speaking. But our punctuation this time is a question mark because he's asking a question. "How can we get to the other side?" asked the billy goat gruff. Okay, he's not saying this bit. He's not saying gruff. So we don't need that inside our inverted commas. Okay, and at the bottom there's a wabble there, what a bad one looks like. "Get off my bridge," and we've got the inverted comma before the exclamation mark, which is wrong. So your punctuation needs to be inside your inverted commas. Okay, commas are really important. If they come before a verb, if the speech comes before a verb like here, so our verb is moaned, if the speech comes before that, we need to get to the other side, moaned the goat. You need a comma to separate what the character is saying and who is saying it. Okay, so again, inside our inverted commas, we've got a comma to separate the speech from who is actually saying it. And then again, another example, "Those goats are always disturbing my sleep," muttered the troll. So we don't just have the inverted commas, we have a comma to separate what the troll is saying and how he is saying it. Okay, so it's just the direct speech that he's actually saying out loud that's inside the inverted commas. Okay, when the direct speech before a verb ends in a question mark or an exclamation mark, you have that instead of the comma. So, "Who goes there?" shouted the troll, is a question. So we need our question mark inside the inverted commas. We're never going to have a question mark and a comma or an exclamation mark and a comma. The question mark and the exclamation mark replace the comma. Okay. When the speech comes after a verb, so when we know who's speaking, when we find out who's speaking before they actually speak, we need to use a comma just to separate who is speaking and what they say. So here we've got the smallest billy goat Gruff said, "I'll go first." And we've got a comma to show that we're separating who is about to speak, as our verb said, who is about to speak, and this is what they're actually saying. So what they're actually saying comes inside the inverted commas. I'll go first, okay? But this comma that comes after the verb just shows us that the verb's finished and we're introducing the actual speech, what the character is saying. Here's another example. The troll shouted, and a comma. Then open your inverted commas. Who goes there? Okay. And the final example, the biggest billy goat Gruff shouted, comma to separate, and then there's your speech, which is inside the inverted commas. Okay. After this comma, although it's just after a comma, when it's inside an inverted comma, you need a capital letter. So we've got a comma to separate, and then the speech starts, and we need a capital I inside the speech mark. Okay, and here we've got a comma to separate, our speech mark, and we need a capital letter to start speech. Okay, so remember to use a capital letter when you're starting the speech. When the direct speech follows the verb, a full stop, an exclamation mark, or a question mark must be used to finish the sentence. So that's just like normal. So when we finish a sentence, normally we finish it with a full stop, or a question mark, or an exclamation mark. And it's just the same with speech, but those punctuation marks go inside the speech marks. The smallest billy goat Gruff said, "I'll go first." And that's the end of the sentence. So there's my full stop to show it's the end of the sentence. And there's my speech mark after it to show it's the end of the speech. Okay. The troll shouted, "Who goes there?" This time it's a question mark because the troll's asking a question inside the speech mark. If we want to punctuate split direct speech, now some of you who are challenge yourself might be aiming to do that today with your speech. That's where the same character starts talking, and then we find out in the middle who they are, and then they continue talking. So it's the same character. Okay, you need a comma to end the first piece of speech and another comma before you do the next piece of speech. So, "I'm light and quiet," said the smallest billy goat Gruff, "so I'll go first." So the things that the billy goat Gruff is actually saying, "I'm light and quiet, so I'll go first." This part in the middle, he's not saying out loud, that's just showing the reader who is speaking. Okay, "I'm light and quiet," said the smallest billy goat Gruff. And in that case, it's the same character, it's the same person who's speaking. So after the comma and inside the inverted commas, you can start with a lowercase letter. Okay, there's a lot to take in this, I know. So what I'm hoping that you'll do is watch this and then go back and watch it again. Okay, take some time looking at this, pausing after each slide and checking that you understand. Okay, if the direct speech is two discrete sentences, that means two completely separate sentences, it's still the same person speaking, but it's two sentences, you need to have a full stop and then start a new sentence, so we need a capital letter. "You're right," agreed the billy goat Gruff. That's the end of that sentence. We start in a new sentence, but it's still the billy goat Gruff speaking. So this time, because it's after a full stop, we need a capital letter in our inverted commas. We can't let the troll beat us. Okay, we have done punctuating speech before in class. I'm hoping that was a bit of a recap, but I know it's quite tricky for people. So like I said, go back through and look at that PowerPoint a few times. You could have a little practice, have a go and try your best today, okay? So what we're doing today is creating a conversation between two characters. So it's going to be your animal and the main character in your story. Okay? what I'm looking for is I'm looking for that you're using the correct punctuation for speech. A new line for a new speaker. So if your animal is speaking and then the man is replying, you need to make sure you start a new line when the man replies because it's a new speaker. And it would be great if you can include who's speaking and how they are speaking. So are they whispering? Are they shouting? And that's your challenge for today. So I want you to have another look at the model text. Hopefully you've all got a copy in front of you, and I want you to look at some of the different reasons the animals give for not wanting the tree to be chopped down. Why is it so important to these animals? What's going to happen to the animal's habitat? Okay, so I want you to pause the video and I want you to spend 5 to 10 minutes reading through the model text again, looking at the speech in the text, what the animals are saying, and what are their reasons. Why don't they want the tree chopped down? So pause the video now. Well, hopefully you've looked and found some of the different reasons. So I'm just going to pick one or two out from the model text. Maybe you got what the monkeys said, which was you chop down one tree and then another. Without these trees, there'll be nothing left to hold the earth in place. When the rain comes, the soil will be washed away and the forest will become a desert. So that's the reason that the monkeys give. The porcupines, they scamper down and they say, "Senor, do you know what all the animals and humans need to live? Oxygen. And do you know what trees produce? Oxygen. If you cut down the trees, you will destroy what gives us life." So they're really persuasive arguments. What's going to happen to these animals' habitats is it's going to be destroyed. The snake says, "Senor, this is a tree of miracles. It is my home where all of my family have lived. Do not chop it down." Okay, so each animal has got a very different reason, but a very real and persuasive reason why the woodcutter should not chop down this tree. Your next task is to think about the animal that you described earlier on in the week. Some of you did more than one animal, so think about those animals. What are your creatures going to say to the woodcutter? Why don't they want the tree chopped down? So if you've chosen to write about a parrot, the reason that the parrot doesn't want the tree chopped down might be very different to why an ant doesn't want the tree chopped down, for example. Your reason needs to be persuasive. Your animal is really trying to stop the woodcutter from cutting down this tree. So if you use a reason that's actually not that exciting or not that persuasive, he's going to still want to cut the tree down. So try to think of a reason. Often for persuasion, you need to really tug on someone's heartstrings. You need to really appeal to him and say, "You cannot cut this down because..." Okay, I'd like you to just pause the video and have 5 minutes thinking about what your creature's reason would be and what they would say to the woodcutter. Pause the video now. So you've had some time to think about what your creature would say, and our next step is starting to think about writing the conversation between your animal and the woodcutter. And like I say, some of you will be writing one conversation, some of you might be writing 2 or 3 if you've chosen different animals. I just want to focus in on what one of the animals in the text said to the woodcutter. So I've picked the frog. So the words in red are what the frog is all about, what the frog is saying to the woodcutter. He quietly squeaked into the man's ear, "Senor, a ruined rainforest means ruined lives. You will leave us homeless if you chop this great kapok tree." Okay, so just to have a look at some of the things I've highlighted there, my speech shows me how the animal is speaking. So it's a frog. He's not going to shout. He's not going to talk loudly. So I've said that he's squeaking, and he's quietly squeaking because he's right next to the man's ear, so he doesn't need to be loud. So I've included how the animal is speaking. We've got the inverted commas there at the start. I've used 2. So I've used 2 at the beginning, so I must use to at the end. So the inverted commas come around what the frog is actually saying. Okay, and my punctuation I've made sure is inside my final speech marks. If you're giving a reason that's a question, even a rhetorical question, you're going to have a question mark. So it might, if you're saying something like, do you want to leave us homeless? You're going to make sure you finish with a question mark inside your final inverted commas. And here we are, we've got an important reason. You will leave us homeless. It's really clear. If you chop down this tree, you will leave us homeless. We'll have nowhere to live. Okay, so that's what I'm going to be looking for at the end of this lesson about your creature. So to make sure that you've got everything right, there's just a list of success criteria there that you can check back on when you're writing your conversation. So I'm going to be looking for the inverted commas at the start and the end of what people are saying, what your creature is saying. You need a capital letter to start inside the inverted commas. You need to make sure they're at the beginning and at the end of what is actually said. So just the words that are coming out of the creature's mouth are going to be the words inside the speech marks. If you've got more than one character speaking, so if the man replies, for example, you need to start a new line with his speech. Make sure you use your correct punctuation. So if your character asks a question, you're going to use a question mark, or you might need an exclamation mark rather than a comma, a full stop. Use a comma. If your speech comes first, use a comma to separate and show, then followed by who is speaking. So you will leave us homeless, comma, inverted comma, said the frog. Okay. And finally, try to include information about who's speaking and how they are speaking. So instead of said, try and think of whispered or spoke gently. Try to show the reader how your character is speaking. Okay, I'm just going to model one here. I'm going to use my jaguar. And if you remember from my description, I finished that by saying the jaguar whispered to the man. So that's how I finished my description from yesterday. So that's how I'm going to start my speech. The jaguar whispered to the man. I'm going to start with my speech marks. I'm using 2. You might use 1, but remember, be consistent. Senor. I'm going to make sure I've got my jaguars at the top of the food chain. I've got to make sure it's really clear that he gets his food in this forest. And without this tree, without this kapok tree, he won't be able to eat. And then he's going to starve and he's going to die. So I've got to make that really clear to the woodcutter. That's my most persuasive appetite. And because he's such a big cat, my jaguar eats lots of food. So I'm going to say, Senor, I have a big appetite. Oh, I don't like big. It's not a very exciting. I've got to be really persuasive. I'm going to say, Senor, I have an enormous appetite. And the animals that I eat have homes in this tree. If you cut it down, where will I find my food? Okay, so, Senor, I have an enormous appetite and the animals that I eat have homes in this tree. If you cut it down, where will I find my food? Now, I can already see I've made a mistake. If you cut it down, where will I find my food? What kind of sentence is that? Where will I find my food? It's a question, so I need to make sure I'm finishing with a question mark. Now, my character has finished speaking. In fact, I might change the word food and put prey. So he's finished speaking. If you cut it down, where will I find my prey? And he's finished speaking, so I need to make sure I am closing my speech marks. Okay. The jaguar whispered to the man, Senor, I have an enormous appetite, and the animals that I eat have homes in this tree. If you cut it down, where will I find my prey? So I could then have the jaguar leaving, and I'd put before on my plan about the jaguar, I'd put before on my plan when he had finished speaking. Actually, I changed it because I didn't want to keep using the word jaguar. So I had, after he had finished speaking, the creature walked slowly away. Okay, so I could leave my speech there. That would be a speech for one of my animals, and then I could have a go at doing another animal. If you wanted your the woodcutter to respond to the jaguar, I'm going to make sure I start a new line. So I'm not going to write on here. The woodcutter might say, "That's my job. Sorry." I'm not going to start that on this line because this is a different character who is speaking to this. So I'm going to make sure I start a new line for that character. I need to start with a capital letter. That's my job. Sorry. And I need to finish with an inverted comma. That's my job. I'm really sorry. And I'm going to introduce my character at the front. Okay. The woodcutter replied, and a comma to show that I'm separating who's talking. The woodcutter replied, "That's my job. I'm really sorry." Okay, so the jaguar whispered to the man, "Senor, I have an enormous appetite, and the animals that I eat have homes in this tree. If you cut it down, where will I find my prey?" The woodcutter replied, "That's my job. I'm really sorry." Maybe you have the jaguar talking again and replying, trying to give another persuasive reason, and if so, you start a new line for that new character. So by the end of the lesson, you're going to have 1, 2 or 3 conversations even between your different animals and the woodcutter, trying to persuade him not to chop down the tree. So pause the video and complete that task, and then come back for a short plenary at the end of the lesson. So the plenary today is just to think about different ways of saying said. And the reason I'm saying that is when you write lots of conversation, we don't want to end up with said, because it sounds really boring. So just to finish off, I want you to think of as many different ways as you can to write how somebody is speaking. Just checking my spelling there. So you need to make sure you're using a dictionary or a thesaurus if you want to, or just try to think of some different ways of saying said. When you've done that, just go back to your conversations and think, have I used different synonyms for said, or have I kept using said the jaguar, said the frog, said the woodcutter? And if so, try and go back and use some of these synonyms that you've thought of. Well done today. Speech is tough, but keep practicing. Watch this video more than once if you're not sure. And we'd love to see your conversations posted on Class Dojo. Bye.